Welcome to English Practice Stories. I don't really know how to start this, so I guess I'll just lay out some important information. First and foremost, I don't suffer from any mental illness or disorder, as far as I know. Since I was a child, I have been tested, and my family has no history of mental illness. Second, English is not my first language. I was born and have lived all my life in Poland. Third, my name is Dukaslaw. This will come later. That being said, after hanging out with my friends over beer last night, I was convinced by them to share my experience somewhere safe, and I chose here to meet people who are into this kind of stuff. This memory is still fresh and still lingers in my brain daily. I don't quite understand what happened. I am hoping that writing this out and letting others who don't ridicule me or call me insane might put me at ease and maybe help me wrap my hand around it as I go on and around who I was as a person just months ago. To be fair, though, I do feel kind of dumb posting this on a subreddit of all places. It started around 7 months ago, when I moved into an apartment near my college that was bought by my parents. It was cheap but cozy, and it didn't do any damage to my family's bank account. The house was a small, white, wooden hut, with a black triangle roof with a few missing tiles, 4 windows on each side of the house, and a small background. I was unsettled from the start, though. Ever since I first saw it, I felt unsettled. The house looked pretty normal. There was nothing to be afraid of. It was just a small house. Yet I wanted to sprint away from it as quickly as my human legs could allow me to. I couldn't, though. It was the only place I could go, not like I could ask my parents to rent me or buy another apartment. As well off as we aren't made of money. I may sound like I am bragging, which is fair, but I am saying this to explain why I stayed and the sheer fear. Maybe I am just using excuses. Anyway, off the tangent. The house had a very small lawn with freshly cut, very short, beige grass. However, the second red flag and first strange occurrence was the wooden fence, or half of it. Half of the fence was just gone. I considered tearing it down but didn't go through with it before moving out. I actually asked the quiet old lady who lived nearby what's up with the fence when she welcomed me. She said that a year or 2 ago, before I moved in, it was just random. It disappeared. Or, well, half of it. She assumed it was vandals but mentioned that others who lived closer had different ideas, which I soon learned. Another strange thing I noticed, which I was sure was a coincidence, were the 2 houses next to mine. They were up for sale. They were unoccupied. And they were huge. Both coincidentally sandwich my apartment. By this time, I had known something was off but kept it to myself, mostly focusing on befriending and hanging out with my colleagues as well as studying. I mostly put my concerns at the back of my mind. The aura, the fence, and the houses. It was sort of like how, In most paranormal accounts, the malicious spirit can spread its evil, warn others, and affect reality. The apartment itself was one big space with a bed, windows, a big kitchen, heaters, paintings, a table, 5 chairs, a pool table, a desk, and a chandelier, as well as a separate spacious bathroom. There was also a ladder that, when pulled down, would lead to the attic, which I usually just ignored as I don't really fuck with small, dark spaces because of horror movies. It was generally just a very good apartment. Over the course of 3 days, I unpacked and settled in. I invited people I met at the college. I summed up the unnerving feeling I felt when in front of the house for the very first time as simple stress, though I did keep in mind the other strange things. And, hey, I didn't get many noise complaints from neighbors. My 4th red flag was on day 13. I woke up at night, half asleep, because of a loud noise. I didn't think much through it, and 8mm went back to sleep. It isn't uncommon for me to wake up and fall asleep right after. Later, I woke up to everything I had put in the room being rearranged. Not like, thrown around everywhere, but rearranged. The strangest part was that all the objects moved were mine, and mine alone. The furniture stayed the same. My phone was on the other side of the bed, my food was unpacked, the meat and vegetables were separated in the fridge, the backpacks were in the closet, the clothes were rearranged from how I left them and neatly laid, and the pool table had been used, which I hadn't since 6 days before this incident. I quickly got up and, in panic, called the cops before even dressing up. For the next 3 days, I stayed at the apartment of a girl. I knew that I quickly began dating after this. My impulsive call to the police had its consequences, however. The police checked the house and said there were no signs of a break-in. There was no further investigation, and I felt judged. One of the cops did suggest that, for peace of mind, I should install Ring cameras. Many people in my college asked me what happened, and I simply answered that some asshole tried to break into my house. After 3 days, I moved back in without my parents knowing anything had happened. I returned to my routine. After this incident, I felt too lazy to do anything to my house for safety and assumed the douche wouldn't try it again. I also work out, so I was confident I could just dropkick the guy. Around this time, I made a new discovery about my house too, the phone reception. Often, when I was in my apartment, the connection just got really choppy. I assumed it to be just the shitty connection, but then I found out the calls worked completely fine outside my property. It was just calls too, especially video calls. Everything else worked completely okay on my property. At this point, I was contemplating calling my parents for the first time in weeks to ask for a change in apartments, but I wasn't sold on it yet. That was until a day later, 4 days after the supposed break-in. I woke up, and it happened again. Everything was rearranged. I wasn't as shaken as last time, but I called the police again. They came with no signs of a break-in and no clues. They even checked the attic for a squadron. No signs either. They just found a bunch of empty bags, boxes, and trash you'd expect from a haunted house, like a rope. They were pretty sure I was a prank caller and told me to stop calling them or I would face criminal charges, although I'm not sure if they were bluffing or not. Though I can tell they had their doubts about even that, probably due to my unwavering expression of terror. At this point, I had figured out I couldn't get authorities involved again, at least not for a while, and that whatever was happening wasn't exactly harmful. I decided to call my parents and ask for an apartment change, and I explained my situation. They didn't comment much aside from just telling me they couldn't buy me a new apartment or rent one out. So that was of no use. I decided to sleep over at my friend's house, but not before installing cameras in my apartment to watch. After I woke up, went to my lessons, and got back home, everything was rearranged again. However, it was way messier. The attic was opened, one of the shelves in my closet was open, and my bed sheets were thrown off the bed. After climbing the ladder with a flashlight and pocket knife, I noticed nothing amiss up there. After cleaning everything up and securing the attic entrance for my own sanity, I checked the camera footage. The camera footage It wasn't camera footage, it was a bunch of pixels with no pattern or reason. It was like you went into Ms. Paint and vomited out the entire color palette. Even though I might not seem like it, I am a spiritual, Christian person, even if I'm not the best follower. So, my conclusion is that this house was most likely haunted. It explained most of the activity. The aura, the houses, the cameras, the rearrangements, opening shelves, etc. So, I decided to call a priest to bless the house the next day. It was quite fast. I felt better after it, but I still kept myself on guard. At this point, I barely slept at night. However, after the priest left, things kept getting more confusing. The activity did not stop. The next day, I woke up to the sounds of footsteps, right by my bedside. They were clear and frantic. I jumped up, and the footsteps quickened. I have no idea where they went, but it was like someone had bolted as I woke up, yet there was no one. I prayed to God. It did not stop, so I resorted to every other religion there was for help. None of the gods answered. Over the course of the next few weeks, things kept getting worse, and it really affected my life. I stopped hanging out, I stopped going to classes, which I already skipped. I talked to my girlfriend only about the terrors that led to her leaving me. I stopped showering as much, I ate lots of food, and I wasn't even worried since my parents paid for everything. Now, to just list everything that's happened in this time span in terms of weird activity. The cameras still didn't work. Things were still rearranged, but now more carelessly. I stayed up at night, seeing things randomly open. At times, I saw things just floating. I often broke them and yelled, as if that would scare the ghost away. The attic was not opened again. I bolted certain things, like the fridge, and hid the key, yet they still managed to be opened. At times in the mirror, I just didn't see myself for a moment. It was similar to how areas take time to render inside the game, except it was the image of me in the mirror, like a vampire. And the biggest action, which leads into the part where I started being extremely concerned for my well-being. One day, I woke up and felt a cold breeze. At the foot of my door outside my apartment stood my neighbor, who yelled, "Hey!" I freaked out upon realizing it was my neighbor, and my door was just open. It was very early, too. I quickly jumped out of bed in my boxers to confront the old man. He then proceeded to explain something that put me in way more panic. When he woke up, he saw my door just wide open. This specter was now opening my door. It was putting me in actual danger. I couldn't even bolt the door. It wouldn't work, and how would I get out? The windows. It could open them too. This ghost, at least to me, didn't seem to want to actually kill me or anything. I just liked it. Messing with me. Or at least, I thought. And obviously, things just got worse and worse. If this door opening kept on going as a regular occurrence every night, someone could break in, I could freeze, I could die. Those thoughts flew through my mind. I started attending classes despite sleep deprivation and sudden crippling fear because of concerns over my huge number of absences. It actually proved quite useful, as I had a distraction from my house. There is still no energy to party around. I became less dynamic. I was way more quiet and put together. However, the paranormal activity continued. I started hearing shouts around my house, especially at night, and objects I never owned started appearing out of nowhere. Some of the books I never even heard of were brand new. Sometimes I just saw things being opened up by something invisible, as if I were living with a masked roommate. I felt breath sometimes. I often felt watched when doing things. I had no more incidents with doors, though, thankfully. Blinds would be down even if I put them up. I even saw them being closed in real time once. I tried recording this on my phone, but of course, as soon as weird shit began, it malfunctioned. I know, convenient. Things I remember appeared too. Or were they altered? Once I remembered, I saw a paper I wrote, randomly corrected by myself. Even though I hadn't done it. I even briefly considered that maybe I have multiple personalities or something. But I disregarded that idea quickly. I mostly distracted myself with Netflix, YouTube, and Instagram since I didn't talk to others that much, but even that wouldn't work, as it would quickly just switch to another show or setting. It really was like having an obnoxious roommate. Except it was a ghost. I woke up to my food being eaten. Thankfully, it wasn't eaten all the way through, usually. Sometimes the food just seemed off. The half-eaten food was sometimes bitten into or just randomly cut. Things got very trippy here. I can't exactly describe it, but the textures of everything started being different. I smelled different scents. I can't quite explain it. And remember that fence I mentioned? Well, I found the other half. It was stuck on my wall. Somehow. It looked like a clipping error in a video game. Half of it was just in the wall, with no depression or sign of being put there. It was as if it was always there. I tried touching it, but I clipped through it too. I couldn't grab it. I couldn't sense it. I couldn't feel its presence. It was like a texture without a model. And as soon as I turned around and looked back, it just vanished. At times when sleeping, I would hear someone weeping next to me, to which I would scream in anger and fear until my throat turned sore, only to make the crying louder. A familiar cry. I didn't know why at first, but I found out later. During this time frame, I also had a part-time job. I worked 4 hours a week. It didn't pay well, but it was something, and it really put into perspective how I never really worked for anything much. I also kept begging my parents to change apartments, to which they kept saying no, but I could tell we were slowly going down under the pressure. At this point, I actually started feeling very happy. I talked to others again. All because I knew I would leave this cursed house behind. But at the same time, I did have a realization: what if I was followed by the ghost? I doubted it since it didn't bother me outside my property, but it was good to consider regardless. I also thought about whether I could get rid of the ghost, which led me down a rabbit hole of searching up the house's history. Not much was known or mentioned, but what I did know is that the house was constructed in 1993 and had at least 5 different occupants. One was a family, the other a college girl, another a man, another a couple, and one someone who lived there for a quick job at the city I couldn't get the gender of, with them all leaving and describing the place as haunted. Luckily, to my assurance, no one there had died, so that was a positive, but I also begged the question: why was the house actually haunted? By now, it had been 5 months. My parents agreed to change apartments, since I actually started working, and everything went well. My new apartment would be smaller, quite cheaper, but closer to my college. And despite that, I was glad. The last few nights in the house surprisingly aren't that chaotic, up until the final 4 cycles I spent calling this apartment home. I woke up to a noise. A noose was tied to the rope that was in the attic, which was now unbolted. Throughout the day, strangely, nothing happened. It was like the ghost committed suicide. I was extremely confused, but I didn't feel like trying to wrap my head around it. Over the next few days, the activity returned. Things were rearranged and taken away. Everything was open, as if looked through. New things appeared, like untouchable Android phones or drinks. At one point, I found a piece of police tape that, after roughly half an hour, vanished without a trace. Strange things were happening not only at night but during the day as well. All my previous thoughts were just kind of thrown out the window. I didn't get this. What did I actually experience? Should I care? Why did the activity briefly stop? What was with the rope? Was this even my concern now, as I had only a day left? I had answers to none of these. I was left speechless, with my thoughts devoid of answers. On the day I packed, I found a note. I felt like since I was leaving and the ghost died, or at least was role-playing a crime scene, I could take a picture, which I did. It was as clear as day. I tried taking the note, but it vanished from my pocket as soon as I left. I honestly don't know if it was left on purpose or not. I don't honestly know what to say about the note, which feels wrong because of its contents. I am just at a loss for words, so the best I can do is actually give you a transcript of it. Make of it what you will. This is a place that is an unnatural glitch in the natural order of things. It is comparable to two plates stacked on top of one another, overlapping, with the liquids and crumbs falling from one to another, and once the washing machine turns on, mixing with one another. This place, by all laws of the universe, shouldn't exist. It is an error. It is a mistake of the Creator. May this place be torn down to its atoms. The ghost is me. Dukaslaw. If you like our story, subscribe English Practice Stories channel and click the bell icon.